So chapter 6, how to script the DOM. And what's the DOM mean again?
Document object model.
Yep. Yep, document object model. JavaScript, you use the DOM quite a bit just because you can manipulate it using JavaScript, have it do some things that you want it to do, whether it be change colors, add text, remove text, get values, stuff like that. So objective, part 1, develop DOM scripting applications that work with forms and controls, including applications that add nodes to the DOM. Use Chrome's developer tools to view the changes that JavaScript has made to the DOM. Knowledge part of it, describe the use of the DOM in JavaScript applications. Describe these properties of the node interfaces with DOM. Parent node, child nodes, first child, last child, next sibling child, nodeValue, and textContent. Describe these methods of document interface for the DOM, the query selector, query selector all. A lot of these are going to be kind of a refresher on what we've done either with CSS or so far in JavaScript already. Describe these methods of element interface for the DOM, has attribute, get attribute, set attribute, remove attribute. Explain how the DOM HTML specification can simplify coding when compared to the DOM core specification. Describe how to use the class list property for the element interface. Describe the use of a form that has been submit button and a reset button. Describe the use of textbox, textarea, select, radio, and checkbox objects. Describe these methods for working with form controls, submit, reset, focus, blur, and select. Describe these events for working with controls, focus, blur, click, double click, change, and select. Describe the process of using the append child and insert before methods of node interface to add nodes to the DOM. Like I said, a lot of this is going to be a rehash of stuff we've already worked with, like the submit, the reset, the focus, the blur, the select. CSS, we used parent elements and child elements and stuff like that. So we're going to be doing the same thing in this chapter, but kind of showing you how to access them a little bit more. So here's code for a web page. They have a body with an H1 in there. They have an H2. Here's the form. Form again has an ID, name, the action, and method. The method's the way it gets sent. Then you have your label, your input type, text, ID, email address, and then a span for an email error. So when you look at this, all these break down into like a chart. So if you look at this document object model for the web page, this breaks it down and how you can look at it when you're trying to access the DOM kind of part of it. So you have the HTML, that's the start up here. Here's our HTML tag. That's the first thing we have. That's what it starts with. That's the main part of the DOM. It's this HTML part here. Under the HTML we have a head. There's our head, and then a body, and then you can see we close the HTML. So that's like the two main nodes under the HTML is going to be the head and the body. And then if you look under the head, we have a title. Here's our title, and in that title there's text. So as you look through this DOM, you got a head, you got the title, you got the text. You had meta tags in there. You could probably put the meta tags in there with the text and all that kind of stuff. Under the body, we go back and look at the body. They have an H1 and an H2. Here's the H1. I'm surprised they don't have the H2 listed. They have the H1. There should be an H2 with a text node under it. And then a form here. You can see the form. I keep scrolling the wrong way. So you got the form. Inside the form there's a label, there's an input and a span. So inside the form there's label, input, and span. Each one of those break down into a node of itself, and then the label and span both have text. The label, you can see the text here in the label. Input doesn't have any text associated with it, and the span has some text associated with this little asterisk here. And so when you look at this, the title has some text under it, the H1 has text under it, the label, and the span. So it breaks down like that for any element you have. You could have a paragraph under this body, and in the paragraph you could have text, so you'd have another little oblong circle and then a text rectangle below it to break it down. So anytime you have an HTML page, you can technically break it down like this. I don't know if you always want to, because it could get pretty massive depending on the size of the page, but you can think of it this way, as this little chart, and when you walk the DOM, that's how you do it. So you'd have the title under the head, the H1's under the body, kind of a thing. So that just kind of shows you all the different nodes inside of a web page, a very basic web page. DOM nodes that are commonly used: document, the element, the attribute, and the text. The document's the thing itself, the elements inside, the attributes for the elements, and then the text under it all. Some of the properties of the node interface: you have the parent node, child node, the first child, last child, next element sibling, nodeValue, and textContent. And these are just all ways to access the elements and anything under them, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that kind of flow down through it. So in these next coming slides, I'll give you some examples of it. So here's an HTML span element with 3 child elements. So you have the span as the parent element, and you have all these things in between the span tags, so they're technically child elements. So the bold is one child element, the underline is another child element, and then the italicize is finally the third child element. And so how to get the element objects from the span element? We've already looked at this previously, I forgot what, chapter 4. So they have a constant variable, name it span, do a document.query selector, and they're saying span. So again, the document, they go out to the document, which is your web page. They're using this query selector to say, go find a certain selector. The 3 types of selectors you can use are, anybody? So you can use the ID, you can use the class, or you can use the element, yep, itself.
It's the same as CSS, right?
Exactly, and that's what I said. This is kind of going to be a refresher on a lot of it, because we've already done CSS, we've accessed things by ID, we've accessed things by class and by element itself. So this is just a way to get to these elements on a web page and manipulate them if you want to. So here they're saying go find the span tag. It's just in the quotes. There's no dot in front of it or no pound sign in front of it, so we know that it's going after the element itself, which is the span. So it'd say go get the span tag for us. How to get the text from a span element with the nodeValue property. So what they do here is they're doing a constant, calling it B element text, which means the bold. They go get the span here, and then they get the first child. That first child, when we look through here, that first child is this bold. So that's what they're doing with this first child part of it. And then the first child after that is the text inside this bold. And so that's why you see span first child, first child. So the first child is getting the bold tag here. The second first child is getting this text node inside of it. So if we looked here, it'd be like, this would be our span tag almost, or this could be our span tag, and this would be the text thing. So that'd be the first child. That's the first child. And so that's why you see first child on this. It may look confusing, but just think of it as going after that first bold tag and then after that text inside of it. And then once it gets that text, it says get us that value of that text. So grab whatever that text is. So welcome. So this nodeValue would be holding the value of welcome inside of it. So then when you go look at this whole line of code, get the span tag, get the bold tag, get the text, and get that text value for us. Put it inside this B element variable that we created. So then they do this constant U element, which is the underline here. And it says span, go get the span, our span tag. First child is the bold, and then it says get the next element sibling. The next element sibling, of course, is the underline tag here. Then it says get that first child under the underline tag, which is this text in here, and then get that node value from it. So it says go find that first child after span, which is the bold. Go find that next element sibling, which is the underline. Go find that first child under the underline, which is the text, and go grab that value of the text with that node value is what that's saying. So like I said, it gets a little ugly or a little confusing. There's a lot going on there. But if you just kind of think about it and walk the DOM like in this little chart here, it'll make a little more sense on how it's going through. So then finally they do a constant I element, which is our italicized element there, the little exclamation point. And they're saying go get the span tag, go get the last child, and of course the last child, we got our bold underline, the last one is our italicized, the I. Get that first child of the last child, and the first child of it is that text in there, and then go get that value of that text. So it's just saying go find the last one, get the first thing under it, which is that text, and give us the value of the text. So then they do a console.log where they do a B element plus the U element plus the I element, and it displays as welcome back. So that's all it's doing, is pulling out each little piece of that span element and then putting it out onto the screen. With the text context property, so they do a variable name, a constant variable, name it span text. They do a span text content, console.log span text, and that just displays everything. It's not walking through the child or anything. It's just saying grab everything in that span, all that text, and put it out for us. So that's what it's looking for there. So when you see this text content, it just goes, finds the text inside that span tag and prints it out, is all that's doing. So it skips this here, takes each little piece and does it. This text content, the node value takes each little piece from each child. This text content part just says grab all the text in that span tag and put it out for us. So node value and text content, that's kind of the difference in it. How to set the text of the span element's first child. So you see they get the span, and the way they get that span again is just doing this, did I pass it? Is doing this document.query selector span. They have that variable named span there, so that's why they keep using span, is it's already being set with this query selector. So span dot first child text content, that first child again is going to be which tag? Yeah, so that bold here is the first element, so that's going to be the child there. So they do this span first child text content, and again that text content gets that text inside the span. They set it to the value of hurry, and so console.log, they do span text content, and they change that first child text content to hurry. So instead of saying welcome back exclamation point, they change the value of that text in that first child to hurry, and so now instead of welcome back it says hurry back. So if you do some kind of a JavaScript function and you say, have you been here already? You can say welcome back or something like that, and then just check something that says I'm new or I'm returning. You can say hurry back. So that's how you would change the value in there, by running a function or something like that in JavaScript. How to set the text span of an element. Again, they have the span. They use the text content. They're not selecting a child or anything like that on this example. They're just using span text content. This one here, they're calling the child and setting that text content. So because they're just getting the text content out of that span and saying hi, that's all it's going to display is hi. It replaces all the child elements with the text node and just displays hi at that point. So just like this example where they do the span text and do that span context, it pulls all that stuff out of there. This one replaces it all with just that word hi there. Common methods of the document element interfaces. Query selector selector. That query selector selector, we'll pick one of the selectors. This query selector all grabs all the selectors. Usually ends up as an array, and you can access it, and they'll give you an example here in a little bit of it. Common methods of the element interface. Has attribute, and just look for the attribute name. Get attribute, you can pull back the attribute. Set the attribute, you set the name of the attribute and the value you want to use, and then remove attribute, and it can just remove the attribute by the name of it. So how to create an array of all anchor tags in a document. You do create a constant variable, call it links, assign it the value of that document.query selector all. And again, that query selector all goes and grabs all the anchor tags in your document, in your page, and then stores them as an array until you access them as needed. And it will show us here in a second or two how that looks. So in HTML UL element, you have your unordered list. They give it an ID of image list, and then you have your list items, and they use some images here. How to get an array of all LI elements within the UL element. Here they do a list. They use that document query selector, and the pound tag says they're doing what? Yep, they're getting it by ID. If you look up here in our little example here, here's the ID image list. They're accessing it, their image list. And then they create a constant called items, and then they do list using the list we just created here. And then query selector all LI, so they're pulling both of these LIs now into this items and making an array out of it. So that ends up being an array with some items. The LIs in this item variable here that we just created. And a couple more slides, and I'll kind of show you how to access them. So how to test for and get an attribute. If list has attribute class, and if it does, they create a constant variable called class attribute, and then they do list get attribute class. And it does have an attribute, the source here. How to set an attribute, list set attribute class and open, and how to remove an attribute, list remove attribute class. So they're taking that attribute class off of it, and then they would just leave it with the open class there, or the attribute. The URL for DOM HTML specifications. I'm going to take a look at that real quick. So quite a bit of stuff you can go through with this DOM. Naming conventions, XHTML and HTML DOM. Object definitions. So quite a bit. You can see it scrolls on forever. So good reference material to have there if you need something with it. Probably something easier out there to find if you need it. So that's the URL for DOM HTML specification. Typical properties available with the DOM HTML specification. All is the ID of the attribute, title, the title of an attribute, class name, the class attribute to set multiple class names, separate the names with spaces, tag name, the name of the tags like div, h1, h2, anchor, image, paragraph, anything like that with that tag name. The anchor one, you use the href, that gets the href attribute. The image, you can use source, that gets the source attribute. The alt gets the alt attribute. And then input is disabled, and that disables the attribute. And we've used most of these, like I said, as we've gone through some of the CSS and that. How the DOM HTML specification can help simplify your code. How to get and set an image tag source attribute with the DOM core specification. So they do create a constant called image element, go out and get the image ID, alert image element dot get attribute source, so that give you the source, and then image element dot set attribute the source, and they're setting that source. And again, that source, just like when we do elements in HTML, it's just saying go use this line JPEG as the source. So let me see if you can see our source here. It's saying go use that line, what was it, JPEG or whatever, as our source. So you're setting the source now with JavaScript instead of coding it all out in the code. So that's what's going on there. Just go get the image ID, get the attribute source, and then set that source for line JPEG. And I believe in our labs for chapter 6, one of the chapters, you're going to do some like rollovers and stuff like that with your mouse, and I believe they have you set them up like this. How to get and set the same attribute with the DOM HTML specification. Alert image element dot source. That image element dot source is that line JPEG. Other examples of using the DOM HTML specification. How to get the ID attribute of the first element in an array. And this is what I was talking about when you do that query selector all. This is how you access it. So they create a constant variable called links, assign it the value of document.querySelectorAll. Again, this query selector all is grabbing all of the element tags, or the anchor tags in your HTML page. And then to access it, you do a links, and then you do your, like you would an array, access your element, like that, and then .id. So if you do that query selector all, that's how you end up accessing them if you need them, is just using it like you would an array, because that's what you do with that query selector all, is you're creating an array of all those anchor tags or paragraphs or whatever. You're grabbing all of those elements with that query selector all, and it just makes it an array, and that's how you access it. So how to get the href attribute of an anchor element. Create a constant variable. You can name it whatever. They name it target. They get that document, or I should say the ID first link, and then the href from it. And so that will let you know what the href attribute is. How to set and get class attributes of an element with two class names. So they go get a div, get the class name out of the div, open and plus, and then the constant class names and that div dot class name, so it should pull back open and plus off of there for you. And like I said, some of this can get a little confusing, and that's why Monday we'll do some of the some code demos so you can kind of actually see how it works and pulls the values back and stuff like that. Other examples of using the DOM HTML specification: how to get tag attributes of the first element in an array. Same thing, they're grabbing all the anchor tags again with this query selector all, and then you do links.tagname. Because these tags are anchors, it returns the tag name A back for us to tell us that we're grabbing all the anchor tags. How to disable and enable an element: they go grab this button play by ID, and we know it's ID because of the pound sign. They set for disabled, and they're setting it true, so that button will be disabled. Here they set the disabled to false, so that button will be usable because it's set to false for disabled. And we may have done something like that already. I'm not sure if we have or not. I know like checkboxes and radio buttons and stuff like that we've used disabled before, whether it be C# or in here. C#, yeah. So I know we've seen some of it already like that. Another property of the element interface is that class list. Common properties of the DOM TokenList objects are length and value, and we've worked with all those already. Common methods of the DOM TokenList object: it contains a class name, add a class name, remove a class name, replace an old name with a new name, and toggle class name. And that class list is just if you had styles or something added to an element, this is a way you can kind of manipulate them. You can see if it contains a class name. You can add a new class name if you need to make it do a little bit more. You can remove one, you can replace one, or toggle it. And here's some examples of it. Here's an HTML element. It's an H2 with the class of first. Welcome to our website. How to get an element object for the label element: I do a constant, name it heading 2, do a document.query selector. They're wanting to go select the H2 element in there. How to add CSS class to the element object: so they take this heading 2, which is the H2 that we just pulled with this query selector. They do that class list dot add, and they're saying add this blue CSS element to the or blue class to the element there. How to replace a CSS class with another CSS class: so they're replacing the blue class now. I'm going to use that red class instead. So if you had text that was blue and did that replace in your JavaScript code, it'd replace the blue text and then make it red if that's how you had that red class actually set up in your styles sheet. How to remove a CSS class: if we don't want that red on there, we just do a remove red. So if you are doing some validation stuff and they forget to put their first name in, and you have it throw up a warning saying must have first name kind of a thing, they go fix it, hit the submit button, and it could take that, use that remove red to remove the red text or the little asterisk or whatever off your code to show them that they actually filled it in right and stuff like that. So you could probably do an on blur or something like that if they move out of the text box that didn't get filled in, and have it change that, remove that red to get it go back or something like that. So that's what you'd be looking at using that for. And like I said, we'll do some demos on Monday just so you can kind of see how some of this stuff works, but most of it's self-explanatory with the CSS knowledge we have. How to toggle a class: here they're just doing a toggle to make it blue and then using that class list toggle. How to check for a CSS class: just an if statement saying if the heading 2.classList contains blue, if it does, add that class bold to it, so then your heading 2 would be blue, and then they would bold it with that. So you can see how they kind of add styles onto a web page that already has styles, so that way Like I said, if you're doing JavaScript code and you want to see something happen, this would say, our text is blue, now let's bold it just so it catches the reader's eye on it and stuff like that. So this now, all we're doing is manipulating some CSS, changing some styles with this class list stuff. You see the class and you kind of already know that you use classes for CSS to manipulate whatever the text or whatever you're doing, the background images. You could do background if you wanted to and have the backgrounds change colors with this. And so terms, document object model, again the DOM. So if you ever hear anybody say they're walking the DOM, traversing the DOM, something to do with the DOM, that's what they're talking about, is document object model. And that document object model again is just the page that you're working on. You got the nodes, core specification, interface, DOM scripting, DOM HTML specification. So pretty much straightforward stuff that we've been doing. DOM scripting is just changing the DOM around, the interface, working with it. As you get into your homework for this chapter, you're going to have some links and some images you're going to click on to make the text visible and not visible and expand and stuff like that. So that's what this here is doing. So they have a body, the main part of it, the ID, they give it FAQs, got an H1, H2 with the href in it. That pound sign means it's not going to go anywhere. Got a div, got a paragraph in there, another H2 with the pound, and that's what this stuff is doing here. Paragraph, an unordered list, another H2, another div with the paragraph in it, close the main, here's your JavaScript. Now you got the CSS here, so you got an anchor, and you can see they color it black. So when we look at it here, that's colored black. It's a href, an anchor tag, but it's colored black, so it doesn't look like your normal blue one and stuff like that. Got the focus. If you hover over it, color gets blue. H2, if you move over the H2, your cursor is going to change to a pointer. In the background, they have this plus PNG, no repeat, left center. So that's what this little plus sign here is. The H2 minus, so they have a minus tag on it. No repeat, left center. A div, display none. So these divs here are technically hidden when you come into the page. And then div.open, when they open, it displays it in blocks, so you can actually see it like this here. That's what that display.block does, or div.open display block does. So the JavaScript for doing that then, so they have an event handler for click event for the H2 elements. So they create a constant, toggle the event, the arrow function here. Inside they're just doing a get the H2, so they say a constant H2 element, do the event and current target, which is the H2s. Then they do a constant div element, the H2 element dot next element sibling. So when we look at these H2s, you got your H2, the next element sibling is going to be these div tags, is what they're going after there. So next element sibling is getting the div tags just like it says here. H2 element class list, toggle the minus, div element class list, toggle the open, and then cancel default action at H2's child. So, and again, we saw that prevent default in previous chapters. It keeps it doing from what it should do. So event prevent default, and that keeps the anchor tag from being clickable. Document.add event listener, that DOM content load it. We've seen that already. It waits till the page loads before it does anything. We run an anonymous arrow function. and it's saying get those H2 tags. They do a query selector all, the ID of FAQs, and then the H2. So they get that ID of FAQs and get all the H2s associated with it. And for let the H2 elements H2 elements, so they're looping through it. They do an event listener, add a click event listener on it, and then do a toggle to it. And then they set focus for the first H2 tag's anchor tag by doing this H2 elements. And again, the reason they did that is because they just did this query selector all up here. When you do that query selector all, it's going to put all the elements you're after into an array. And so here they're saying access that first element of the array, the first child focus, so put the focus on it is all that's doing there. And then they go into a form in a web browser. And again, that form, the action, the method, they got some IDs in there. The button type is a submit, or the input type is submit. The URL that's sent when the form is submitted with the get method. And you remember what the difference between the get and the oh my god, what's the other name of the post? Thank you.
No, I don't remember the difference.
So when you use the get, it passes your parameters through the address bar. You can actually see what you're passing through. That post kind of hides them. So I would recommend trying to use that post as much as possible, just because it keeps all your data hidden. And when you use the get, you can see your data actually show up. So you can see that email address is that grace@yahoo.com. And then you can see first name is Grace. So like I said, when I first started with the Department of Defense, when we started converting our software application over to a web application, they were using that get method. And after a while, they're like, hey, you know, you can see all the data you're passing through a form with this get method. So they ended up using that post method, and it keeps it a little bit more hidden. We had to do some more stuff on it to make sure it wasn't hackable and that, but yeah, that's the different. Get method shows all your data in there, and that post method will not. Attribute, so the form element, the name, the action, the method. And we've done forms in HTML weeks ago, so that shouldn't be anything new to you there. Terms related to forms, form, controller of the field, the submit button, reset button, and data validation. Stuff we worked with already. Property of a text box, text area, select area, that value, we've worked with that already. HTML code for a text box, text area, and select list. Just setting up a typical one. Here's the text box, text area, and our select list there. JavaScript code to get the text box, text area, and select values. Here they're doing a name, get that name by ID, get the value of it, comment value. So there's that name by ID, that comment by ID. Do some validation on it. If the name.length is 0, give them an alert, tell them to enter a name. If comment is 0, tell them to enter a comment. They go out and get the country value. If the country's USA, they do some processing, so and so and so and so, depending on what the country is. JavaScript's code to set the text box, text area, and select values. So they're just letting the values all the blanks, no value in it technically. Two properties of radio or checkbox object is the value and checked. And again, we've worked with these. So radio button, the names have to be exactly the same for the radio buttons to allow you to only select one at a time. So if you have 5 radio buttons, they all have to have the name of contact to work properly. If not, you'll be able to select multiple radio buttons, and that's not what a radio button is for. The IDs will all have different IDs on them, and the values will have different values on them. but that name has to be exactly the same on a radio button for it to work properly. Checkbox, the name, they all have separate names, and the ID usually matches the name, but they'll all be unique as you walk through your checkboxes, however many you happen to have. Here they set the value to accept. The radio buttons are setting the value to text or email. So the JavaScript code for checking that, let contact equal null. If the ID text is checked, contact equals text.value. So they're saying if this text is checked, the value is text. Set this contact variable to whatever that value is in there, which happens to be text is the value in there. Email is checked, get that email value, so when we look at it, the value of email is email, so that way you know they're either checking they want to be notified by text or notified by email is what that's really doing. So if you have a form or something like that and it says how may we contact you or what's your preference of being contacted, you give them that radio button with checked, with email. You could probably have phone on there, something like that, in person, and you would set your value to text, email, phone, in person, and then when you do this, get the value of it and assign it to contact. That way you know what way they want to be contacted in. So anytime you grab that contact variable, it'll tell you which way they want to be contacted. And here it says if contact equals text, do something with that. Else if contact equals email, do something with that. And then else you must select a contact method. We could have another else if and say contact equals phone. Else if contact equals in person, and then have some code behind it. If accept is checked, accept processing, and that just shows that it's accepted. And then alert, you must accept our terms of service. So you can set all the checks, the text and email to false until they check it, and then you can reset it to true if you want to, or just get it as checked. Here they're checking the accept by default, and that way it's already accepted, and they can uncheck it if they want to keep it from being true. Commonly used form methods, submit and reset. Like I said, we've worked with forms already. Methods that are commonly used with controls is focus, that sets the focus on it. The blur is moving in and out of the text box. Select will usually highlight the text in a text box, and that way if you want to copy it easily, you can do that. Common control events, focus, blur, click, double click, change, and select. Pretty common events for text boxes. That shouldn't be anything new to you guys at this point between C# and what we've worked with already in JavaScript. Yeah. Statements that use the reset and submit buttons, they go get the ID off the button. That button's ID is registration form. They do a reset on it if it's clicked, or a registration form and submit on it if it's clicked. So pretty basic, straightforward stuff there. Kind of already what we've been doing. It's just getting it by ID there. An event handler for the change event on a select list. So they do a constant, give it a name of investment, change, run the arrow function. Inside that function, they do a calculate click method. So they're calling value calculate click method. And then they do this investment.blur, and it removes the focus from the list. An event handler for the double click event of a text box. Call it double click. The anonymous arrow function, years.value, and they set that value to blank. DOM content load event handler that attaches other event handlers, and we've looked at a lot of this already. Document.event listener, the DOM content loaded. It waits for everything on your document object model to load before it runs any functions. Or running an anonymous arrow function. and they're doing investment, add event listener, change, investment change, years, double click, and then it sets the focus finally on years. And here's a register application. You can see they have some red fields in it. And if you want to go through the code, you can go ahead and look through this slide. Probably in your book somewhere towards the end of the chapter is an example on there. I'm not going to go through all that just because there's a lot to talk about through it. But you see our JavaScript. Anytime you're using these query selectors or whatever, you want to call it up at the top of your code, so you can just call this $, then that $, is saying go do this query selector for us. As you do the query selector, you're grabbing the email address by ID, the phone by ID, country by ID. If we want to do a class, it'd be a dot. If we want to do the element, it'd be the element name in there. So that's why you see this $, here, is because they're running this piece of code first, assigning it to this $, and then they just keep using this $, to do this query selector for us. Resetting the form, get the form, and again here they're using the actual element since there's no period or no £sign in front of it. They're saying reset it. They reset everything here, and then event listener, DOM content, load it, and then run all this stuff. 2 more nodes of the document interface: create element, and create text node value. 5 more methods of the node interface: append child, the node, insert before, the new and existing, replace child, new and existing, remove child, node, and remove. So they're giving you an example here, a button that adds a new paragraph element to the DOM. So before this button's clicked, you'll have first paragraph and last paragraph, and then your button add to DOM. You click the button and that middle paragraph shows up. So if you look, we have a couple paragraphs in the input. First paragraph says first paragraph, second one says last paragraph. Input type button, value, or the ID is add, value add to DOM. That's why it says add to DOM on there. So then if you click on that button, it goes and gets it by ID, adds an event listener to it, which is the click event. It runs this anonymous function. They create a constant variable called new paragraph, and they use the document.create element. So they're creating a new element now on the page, and it's going to be a paragraph. And then it says create a new text node and add it to the new paragraph tag. So then they do a constant text, document create text node, and they're putting that text middle paragraph in there. And then they get that new paragraph, which is that P up here that we created, new paragraph. They're appending that child, which is this text, to it. And so now that when you look at that paragraph and how we walked through that DOM earlier, it's way up here. When we walked through that DOM earlier, how it had span, first child, node. That's kind of what we're doing down here, is saying new paragraph, append a child. So add a child to that paragraph. So that child they're adding to the paragraph is going to be that text. So then if you did that node.value, you'd pull out that text middle paragraph here. And so then it says get the first paragraph tag in the document and its parent. So first paragraph, they're getting the paragraph. The parent is the first paragraph, parent node. Insert in the new paragraph tag after the first paragraph tag. That is before the element that comes after the first element, paragraph tag. So they do a parent, insert before, and then they put that new paragraph in. And then the first paragraph, next element sibling, so that makes that new paragraph the next element sibling, which actually makes it the second paragraph. And so that's how that middle paragraph ends up showing up there. An updated register application. I think this is one of your labs or homeworks will be part of this part here. Some of the JavaScript. Updated JavaScript, so you go from that there to using this here. More of it. I'm not going to go through all that. It's in your book. So that's it for walking some of the DOM, how to script the DOM with JavaScript, how to walk through it, how to change some of the nodes and elements in it. It's not too bad. It may be a little confusing when you see all the parent, child, all that stuff, but that all goes back to the CSS stuff of the parent and then whatever follows behind it. So
yeah, but also you have this able word only in a condition, I believe.
you can set it, yeah, before anything happens, and then as you go through a conditional, yeah, you can set it to the opposite value or however you want to do it, kind of a thing. So it's just a matter of playing around with it a little bit, and where you're going to use it and how you're going to use it is more of what it falls into. So, but like I said, Monday I'll do some code examples. That way it gives me time to type out some decent ones to make this stuff a little bit more understandable. If it's a little confusing, just going off these slides and walking through their little bit of text and stuff in there.
Yeah, but I'm also kind of thinking about too, well, lately how I kind of doing my code, I kind of like take one code and then use another code and combine it together by thinking about like kind of style type thing. But basically, I'm just wondering, isn't it possible where I can kind of just combine JavaScript and HTML both together? Where I can kind of just like use an if statement and then use a Java as an if statement, and then I set the text automatically disable somehow. Like, I don't know.
Well, your JavaScript is part of the HTML, so I mean, like, I wouldn't say you would combine them, because you're just adding the JavaScript into the HTML to get it to do what you want it to do, whether it be like validating a form, changing a heading on a page, or something like that is what some of this JavaScript that we just learned is doing with this DOM and stuff like that.
Yeah, but then again, I was kind of thinking too, like, do I want to use an external style sheet, or do I want to use a embedded, just embedded?
I would say use external. You want to try and get in the habit of using external. It keeps your code cleaner. It makes everything look a little bit better when you use external. So I would always try and use external. Even with the JavaScript, I would try and use external as much as possible. That way you know exactly where it is in the file. It's in a file. It's not embedded somewhere on the page or anything like that. It keeps your HTML page shorter and easier to read, because you don't have 50 classes of CSS in your embedded style sheet in your page. It's totally somewhere else. You don't have to worry about it, kind of a thing. So I would get in the habit of using external. More than likely when you go to a job, it's going to be external. You may see a little bit embedded, but more than likely most of it's going to be an external style sheet or an external JavaScript sheet kind of page, something like that. So I will stop there, turn you guys loose on working on the rest of your stuff, and then Monday I'll have some code examples of this and kind of refresher over the 3-day weekend break, just to